Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Now, that's a pretty horrific
Aren't you
kind of
glad
scenario.
We didn't end on COVID?
Yes. So I want to talk about the new. TLDR terms of service bill. I don't know what the formal name of it is. Working its way through Congress. It's not yet in a position to be signed into law, but there's apparently a high degree of bipartisan support. The idea is to simplify terms of service. These sort of click wrap contracts, boilerplate contracts that go on for pages and pages with fine print that everybody just clicks right through. Next, agree, and nobody reads because it's sort of pointless and you have no bargaining power, et cetera. And so the proposal is to sort of create a version of Apple's privacy nutrition label with essential terms in a kind of easy to understand, very prominent place. And I think that that's very, very good. There are a couple of kind of caveats. One would be, is it going to matter? Meaning, will people make different choices if they see that stuff? And this is a point I think made by TechDirt, an article on this topic that appears in TechDirt. The real issues are competition and alternatives, right? So we do want to surface important terms so that people can understand them. But if people have no alternatives in the market or effectively don't, what does it matter?
Yeah, and even with Apple's labels, they're not highly visible when you go to download an app. They're below the fold. And so it's not just having information there, it's having it there readily visible right before you're ready to make that click where you can get that information in a summarized way and then a choice. So it's a step.
But I mean,
without a privacy context for any of it, it's all kind of performance.
Yeah. But even beyond that, I feel like a lot of these terms are on sites that we really don't have a choice but to use, like our insurance carrier and our bank and our, whatever, just things that we need. Yeah, exactly. Things that we need in our everyday lives. And, I don't know that clearer terms is going to get us to say, oh, well, I'm not going to deposit my check today because you're going to be, sending that information to Equifax or whatever. So even if I know that, I'm still going to do it.
I think sort of on balance, it's better for people to have simple access to this information, sort of all other things aside. So this is a good impulse and a good initiative. However, I think it will have very limited impact in the real world because I think people just are compelled. This goes back to this whole issue of trust that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. More and more people distrust these services that they use every single day, but they continue to use them because they're effectively locked in one form.
Well, if you take a look at HIPAA, which is an example of a private, people's medical privacy was supposed to be guaranteed, where you effectively have to sign away privacy every time you go to the doctor. Otherwise, you can't get the services at some level. It just shows you that even a framework for privacy often doesn't work because of the pressures against it, right? So it's like, I don't know how many HIPAA giving away, agree to share information forms I had to sign just to get basic health care. So even if there were a more stringent privacy environment, David's point may still be a problem in that you have to get the service, you may still have to give them up given the amount of power the various players in this context have.
Although at the margins, there was I think a PR this week that DuckDuckGo had crossed
billion searches,
the precise number. Yeah, billion searches,
100 million,
which is nothing
in a day or a week or something. 100.
Yeah, nothing really compared to Google, but it indicates that there is now some momentum and people are starting to consciously make alternative choices for rational reasons like privacy. So, for some percentage of the population, this might be meaningful, but for the mainstream, it probably isn't. But it's still good to have this information. More information is better in a digestible format. So, David, would you change your behavior based on this kind of idea? If you were confronted by some really objectionable terms.
If I had a choice, right, if it was something that I was trying for the first time just to see what it was like, then, I might decline to try that out. But in most cases, these are just essential. In most of the worst cases, anyway, these are essential services. I mean, mortgages being probably the worst offender. I mean, they share your information with absolutely everybody. But what are you going to do when you're, you need to sign the papers and you just have to agree to the terms. You're not going to shop your mortgage around to somebody else at the last minute. So,
well, and nobody really has any different terms.
Right.
Substantially different.
Right.
I mean, that's the ultimate example of not reading a contract, right? I mean, I was a lawyer for practicing for almost 10 years, and we refinanced recently, not that long ago. And the guy shows up at your house, or the woman, the notary, and they've got some stack of 300 pages
thick.
Or whatever it is. It's very thick, and it's like sign here, sign here, sign here, and you just want to get the thing done as quickly as possible, And there's really no conversation. Maybe there's one or two questions about something, but for the most part, it's just like you're moving through the sheets, and then they take the papers away, and you don't ever look at it again.
No.
And
that's the world we're living in.
It got worse after 2008, right? I mean, it's just because they're.
Yeah. I mean, that used to be called, if I remember correctly in law school, a contract where you have no ability to negotiate terms. You just have to take it or leave it, I think is called a contract of adhesion. Mm-hmm. And that is the world we live in today.
Right.
Originally the concept, back to the Federalist Papers, originally the concept
and
of
another
contracts.
Podcast.
Yeah. Originally the concept of contracts is that you have two parties of roughly equal negotiating or bargaining power, and they come to some quote unquote meeting of the minds about terms. And that is not what's happening in our world. Maybe it happens on a very small scale with people where there is kind of roughly equal bargaining power. But all these giant companies that we deal with every single day, they just say, here are our terms, take it or leave it. And there's absolutely no negotiation that can happen.
Right. I will say the one thing that struck me on reading that TLDR article, if there is a sort of universal set of standard terms that can be used, and you can advertise that we are a green rated terms of service as opposed to a red rated terms of service, putting that up front on your website in the footer where you link to your terms, may be something that can gain some momentum. I mean, we at Near Media are using essentially the WordPress automatic terms of service, which they license under Creative Commons, right? So if you could get a sort of mass movement of standard terms for standard types of online engagements, that might move the needle on this somewhat.
I mean, I could imagine it with something like a credit card, right? Where you're applying for a credit card, they're competing offers, and you've got a choice of 5 or 6. It really matters in an environment where there's choice. And you can see very clearly what the differences are. We won't sell your data, or we have this beneficial term versus these other guys who are going to put you into binding arbitration and, come in the night and take your family away, whatever it is. And so in that kind of scenario, it would matter. But in situations where you've got a monopoly provider or a quasi-monopoly provider, or you just don't have the ability to make alternative choices, it doesn't really make a difference. So we've come to the end of another exciting and uplifting podcast. There's, of course, lots more to talk about, as always, and we didn't get to everything that, is happening this week. So subscribe to Near Media, where we try and capture as much of that as we can. And we'll be back next week with more exciting adventures.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.